Thank you. So the theme for tonight is, of course, patterns, and the brain is a pattern processor. I've come to believe that over my years studying the brain. It's not intuitive. If anyone's taken a course in neuroscience or biology of the brain, we think of the brain as having these neurons which can send electrical signals. But what that really means for complex behavior of the sort we do every day is that you have ensembles of large numbers of neurons that actually form patterns across space and time within the brain itself. So before we start, I wanted to make a distinction between reason and intuition. So I really study reasoning a lot of the time, but I've come to think that intuition has a lot of value for how we explain our behavior. So you'll see that throughout this talk, that kind of theme of we have multiple ways of processing patterns. So starting with some basic neuroscience, an awful lot of work has been done with rodents and rodent models for learning. So if you give a rodent a task such as this, where you have two levers that the rodent can press. Lever A pays out 60% of the time. It'll get rat chow if it picks that lever. And if it picks lever B, by contrast, about 40% of the time it's going to get reinforced. So this is a pattern of behavior that the rodent is being asked to learn. And what will happen is the rodent will try out both levers. And the brain circuitry of the rodent is able to basically read this pattern and begin to pick lever A all the time. And that's what we call maximizing. So once the rodent has learned this, it's going to maximize and choose that option every time, and it's going to get 60% of that rat chow. So it's going to be, it's essentially learn the task. Now that's a very intuitive kind of model. We don't think that the rodent's probably got its own internal monologue and debating and thinking through the, the exact, it's not writing poetry about this, right? So probably the region or regions that are most relevant to this kind of learning are known as the basal ganglia. This is a cartoon version of the human basal ganglia in blue. It's a set of circuits within the middle of the brain, and it's very attuned to rewards, incentives, and how to capitalize on them. So this is really the type of circuit that's very optimized for learning that kind of pattern of behavior. So this is a really good example of important behavior. Rodents are foragers that can be carried out with what I think is a fairly intuitive circuit. So we have a basal ganglia as well, and it probably informs our decision making, although we don't consciously have access to a lot of its processing. Okay, so we value patterns a great deal. If you've taken IQ tests in the past, they look something like this. This is a matrix reasoning task, and what you do with this kind of task is try to choose from one of these little multiple choice items down here to fill in that missing piece of the pattern. And so this is a relatively straightforward problem. You probably guessed that it's right there. It's just make the visual match that completes the little grid. More interesting problems that start to evaluate our intelligence maybe are ones like this, where now you've got some complex things happening. You've got to read the coloration, you've got to read the orientation, and also what shape you're dealing with in the rows and columns. And if you're trying to do this, you probably are thinking darker, and you're probably thinking triangle, and you're thinking tipping over. That's actually the answer. So when we do this kind of more difficult matrix problem, this is thought to be quite important for IQ. Now what's interesting about these tasks, we call it fluid reasoning. So your ability at this kind of pattern recognition turns out to be correlated with a lot of your other abilities in language, in math, in spatial reasoning. So if you had to have a central sort of property of intelligence, not that I necessarily think we have one, but this is an awfully good candidate for that kind of processing. Now if you compare this to the lever rodent pressing experiment, I think you have something that's akin to intuition in that first case, and this is more reasoning. You can sort of feel you have to attend to things and hold things in memory in order to solve this kind of problem. You're using a very conscious strategy in order to solve these sorts of pattern matching problems. So this is the classic problem in the human brain. Now we have this huge brain with large amounts of cortex. That's actually my brain from an MRI. I'm quite proud of it. And you can see that we have the folded cortex indicates how much processing power the human brain has. I think that amount of cortex is related to our abilities in those matrix reasoning problems to sort of muscle our way through, attend to very novel patterns, and try to piece them together in order to basically carry out problem solving and intelligent behavior. So I boldly put a video in this slide, and I thought this is really one of those cases you sort of need it. What I'm going to show is a clip from one of our experiments in which we basically asked the question, can we detect lies? So this is a clip. We basically asked our participants to choose a movie and either tell us the truth about it or lie about it. So I'll say nothing more about it and see what you think of this story.
So I picked Hangover 2. So I guess I think ultimately I liked the movie. I mean, in general, I like the series of movies. I think it's an idea that people kind of get on board with. It's the shenanigans that come with, like a bachelor party and going to Vegas and like road trip. So as far as like a silly movie goes, I just think they did it really well. It had like a lot of solid cameos, and obviously like the actors are hilarious guys. I thought it was a lot of fun writing. I guess it also, for whatever reason, like connected me back. I had some friends who took trips to like Thailand, and I guess the first one was Vegas, not the second one. And there were just these moments that kind of seemed like little gems of real life, but then kind of got pulled out to an extreme. So I don't know, I thought that was cool.
Okay, so just by a show of hands, who says he's telling the truth? Okay, a lot of people. Who thinks he's lying? Who thinks we can't really tell? Some very honest people. So this is really difficult for people. We are very bad lie detectors. The common statistic is we can detect lies about 54% of the time. So it's above chance, but just barely. And what that tells me as a scientist is this is a pretty interesting pattern recognition problem, because what we're really looking at is a social pattern here. Could I have someone volunteer who thought he might be lying? What made you think he was lying?
He got the whole plot wrong for the second movie.
Oh, so he got the plot wrong. That's a problem. Anything about his face that suggests truth or lies? Yeah.
He kept on like glancing away from everybody.
Okay, so he was glancing away from people. Did that mean he was lying, do you think?
I mean, I think he was sort of like making things up on the fly.
He seemed to be making things up on the fly. Okay, so the actual situation is he was lying. Shockingly, Hangover 2 was not a winner for him. He's in the minority for sure. And so what we did in this experiment is we created these videos. Basically, people had to lie. They had to say they liked the movie, and then they had to say they disliked the movie. And the reason that was interesting to us is because it captures a very realistic experience of lying, where someone has to make up details. So as you noted, he may have gotten some of them wrong. He may have been at times grasping for reasons. I thought he was pretty convincing when he said it was like a classic scenario from college. I mean, he wasn't bad at it. But the question is, why are we such a split audience here? Why don't we all notice the lying? And so that's what we did. You can't ask people because you just get these very basic, we're not that great at it sort of answers. And so what we did is apply a technique called functional MRI. You can put people in an MRI scanner and show them videos like this of people telling truths and people lying. And you can map brain areas that are active while someone is attempting to be a lie detector. And so that's exactly what we did with those same videos. And in order to get an answer from the brain, it's a very sophisticated organ. And so we had to take a very sophisticated kind of analysis, which I think is perfect for this talk. It was actually a pattern analysis that we performed on the brain. So here we have one of our participants, and he's basically feeding visual information to the participant who's in the scanner, and this is their brain. And you can see that we've made these cartoonish patterns on the brain. Imagine the red pattern being representative of lying information and blue being truth. And we don't know if that's the case in advance of the experiment. We're basically questioning, are there brain areas that do this? somewhere in the brain is there the real truth of, hey, this person's lying to me, or actually they're telling the truth. Now, to do the analysis, it really was a pattern classifier. So we use an artificial neural net, which is essentially a brain-inspired software method that lets us classify whether or not different brain states are separable for the lying and truth. If they are separable, if they're showing different patterns when people are lying versus being truthful, that would make them basically lie detection regions. Whether we listen to those regions or not, we don't always do so, but we were able to do that analysis and found several regions that were very accurate at detecting liars. So back here we have the visual cortex depicted in light blue, and also areas of the front of the brain are good at this as well, and areas called the amygdala, which is inside the temporal lobes, so midbrain regions, classic sort of emotional regions, intuition kinds of regions, are sensitive to this. So we actually are good lie detectors. Somewhere in our brain is that signal, and we're probably all saying, yep, he did not like Hangover 2. But the problem is translating that into our actual behavior is very difficult. So people don't always have access to listening to these regions. Now, this is true in all walks of life. Switching gears, Wayne Gretzky, widely thought of as the greatest goal scorer of all time, also an incredible playmaker in the NHL. The famous phrase from Gretzky was that he would skate to where the puck was going to be, not where it was now. And so what that takes is really a pattern identification, very rapid pattern identification, and carrying out an action based on that pattern. And Gretzky seemed able to almost have some sort of foresight that others lack. And so I think a fast pattern recognizing brain for the very complex sport is maybe what made him so great. When we think about great quarterbacks in the NFL, you often hear the term, they can read the defense, right? So the best quarterbacks are not always the strongest or the fastest players, but they're often veterans. So many of the top players are really, they've been around the league a long time. Think of Tom Brady, he's defying all the odds of age, but probably what makes him so effective is he can read the pattern in the defense, maybe almost intuitively, because it has to be done so quickly. And this makes a huge difference. So the NFL is actually interested in these test scores of people. How fast can they recognize things, not just their arm strength. How about chess? Is anyone a chess player? A few chess players. Okay, so chess playing is probably one of the ultimate expertise areas for pattern recognition and applying strategies. And what tends to happen with a chess expert is they get very good at recognizing different board configurations. So good, in fact, they can exceed the memory capacity of most people. So this is classic research from the 1970s. The master level players along the bottom are the number of tries to reconstruct a board that they've just seen randomly. And you can see that in about 2 trials, a master can reconstruct the entire board, which is often 24 to 30 pieces, so many more pieces than we could actually hold in memory or attend to. And you'll also notice on the other graph, the experts do worse when you make it a random board. So you just stick the pieces any old place. It somewhat interferes with their ability to detect patterns because they're so expert at the certain patterns that they've looked at. So at UT Dallas, we have one of the greatest chess programs in the world. It's actually always among the top collegiate programs. We have chess grandmasters from all over the world that are on scholarship and come and do amazing things. And I was lucky enough to be able to study these experts, and they would be happy to go into the scanner. They loved the matrix reasoning tasks. They were all over this. And so what we did is the same kind of method. We put them in an MRI environment. We try to read their brains as they look at different patterns. Now, this is very difficult for most people, and so I'll give you a sense of how this looks. Now, I'm going to flash up a variety of chessboards, just as we did in the scanner with the experts, and try to recognize whether any repeat. So you want to look at where the pieces are, try to read these patterns. Here we go. Okay, did anyone notice a repeat? Did anyone see 2 repeats? That's good, only 1 repeated. Did anyone notice anything funny about the boards? There's some all over the place boards. Yeah, I snuck in a few random chess boards that couldn't happen in a game. Turns out you can't have pawns in the back row and you can't have kings and checks. So we don't notice this. Like I wouldn't notice this either. Doing this, I'm not an expert, but our chess experts find this disturbing. Like they're really like, wow. It just blows their mind that, wow, they've really mutilated that poor board. And so kind of remarkably, there are some very strong brain regions that respond to patterns in experts. So this is a region with the elegant name, the retrosplenial cortex, which is very related to our autobiographical memory. So this is probably telling us that experts have memories for these boards, and actually the less skilled players don't show that. And experts also have signature areas for that sort of disturbing area where we've kind of got a random chessboard. So the pattern matters very much, and our expertise kind of drives these patterns that we can notice. So let's get back to our original task, the intuition task about the levers. Let's ask a human to do the same kind of task. Humans don't do much for rat chow, but let's imagine you get some money if you press these buttons. So you have choice A, a button, you get some money 60% of the time. And choice B, you get the money 40% of the time. Now the rodent tried both of these and relatively quickly settles on always pick lever A and get 60% of the rewards. What a human will do with all of this cortex that we see depicted there is they'll say, well, I'm going to go with A and B, and then B and A, and B, A, and A, And I think A's slightly better, but I'm going to keep trying B. And what we want to do is get all the rewards all the time. We're trying to figure out, what is this diabolical experimenter trying to make me do? I'm going to beat this guy and get all the rewards. And so we actually get outperformed by the rodent in this case. What people will do is they'll pick choice A a little bit more often, but they pick choice B enough that they're actually declining their overall rewards. Now, why do we do this? It's kind of a competition between our intuition, which is probably steering us properly toward choice A always, but we want to come up with theories, right? We want to consciously find a pattern. The same skills that make us great at IQ tests probably interfere with us on these sort of simple reward choice tasks. You can think of cases in life where this is really relevant, right? So if you ask any hardcore slots player in a casino which machine to play, they will have a theory about all of them. And all kinds of things have been integrated into some pattern, which is really surprising and unlikely. And you may have had this experience if you're by an elevator and it's lit, the button is clearly lit and the elevator's on its way. Someone comes along and they keep jamming the button like it's going to come quicker because they really want to get there, as if the elevator will bypass some other floors where they don't really want it as badly. And the same thing happens at crosswalks. You find yourself doing this. I have to shamefully admit, when I'm late for a meeting, I've caught myself doing this as well, because it's like you're looking for some pattern. How can I make this work? And that's, again, kind of silly human behavior that has some basis in our rampant need to find patterns. We are amazing at finding patterns that aren't there. So this is a painting from my workplace. It's in a stairwell, and I come across it just about every day. Take a moment to think about what you see there. I see Sigmund Freud. I'm sure it's not Freud. I'd be shocked if it was, but something about my mind and doing psychology work has made that Freud. So every time I go past that painting, there is Freud. And then I come across this one a couple floors up, and I just can't not see the Rorschach Inkblot. And I just see Freud and Inkblot every single time. And so if you come to that stairwell, I think you'll also find that pattern now that I've implanted that in your mind. So just to wrap up, the brain is a pattern processor, but it's just not as simple as there's one type of pattern. Different brain regions read different signals from our environment. Some of them are very straightforward, visual and spatial. Others are much more complex, like sort of social intuition about whether someone may be telling the truth or are trustworthy or not. And orchestrating all of this is our consciousness, where we can actually seek out patterns that sometimes are present and sometimes aren't there. I think the upside of all of this is, of course, learning. So becoming an expert in something enables you to notice patterns that others can't see. Thank you very much.